I'm able to get these books back from CGC even faster thanks to their improved turnaround times. Hey there, today I have a CGC unboxing video, and in this video I'm going to open up a submission that I sent out for pressing through Palm Beach Comic Book Presser that he forwarded on to CGC after he pressed these books. And the overall turnaround time between the books leaving my possession, going through pressing, arriving at CGC, having them marked as received, graded, and sent back to me. I mean, this is the fastest that I've ever had books returned, and I want to open this up and show you the books that went through pressing. And what I'm going to do is tell you the grade of the book that I gave the book as is in the current shape and condition before pressing, and then the predicted grade that Palm Beach gave the books after he was done, and then obviously, finally, the grade that CGC gave to the book. And this is always fun because I want to start measuring what kind of improvement I can really expect if I were to get the books pressed and cleaned before submitting to CGC. Now, not every book and every defect is the same, but what I'm trying to do is get a general idea. Is it 1 grade bump, 2, 3, none? Does pressing matter? Like, these are a lot of questions that I think about often, but I would prefer to really analyze and quantify them in some way, where I want to look at a book and say, okay, I'm giving this a 9.4, it has pressable defects. What is the likelihood that this book would get the jump from a 9.4 all the way up to a 9.8? And what's nice is because the books are being returned through this entire process back to me, in a short window of time, I'm able to add more and more books to my analysis to really prove out and validate my theories. And for me, it's all about the data. It's about the facts, the realistic expectations when you get a book. Because a lot of what gets highlighted online is, hey, this book was an 8.0 and it got a 9.8, and this can happen to your book as well. But we want to find out, while that is true, what is more of a typical improvement. And what I love about working with Palm Beach Comic Presser is that he is very realistic. He does not look at the books after they're done and say, these should all be 9.8s, and if it's not, it's on CGC. He's very realistic in his estimates as far as what the book should get after grading. But what I'm going to start doing is really tracking all of these books end to end, again, from the original assessed grade, Palm Beach's estimate, and then the final grade, and then look over time at what kind of improvement you can expect to receive if you were to use a presser like Palm Beach Comic Presser. Now, to add to the data, there's only one way to do this, and that is to open up this CGC submission and see those final grades. So let's get this opened up. All right, here we go. So here's what I'll do. I'll show you the book, and then I'll go through the different grading estimates as far as what the predictions were before and after pressing. The first book is Legion of Monsters #1. Now, this is one of the, I would say, newer books. This came out in 2011, December of 2011, and I won this at auction from Infinity Comics. And I felt like at the time this was about a 9.4 and appeared to me to have some pressable defects. And looking at the Palm Beach Presser's notes on this, he has this as a 9.8 likely. As I've mentioned in the past, what I love about Palm Beach Comic Presser is the communication, the process, the workflow that he's established, and he provides me with some greater notes and predictions as far as what he thinks the book will get. But he's also hesitant to just put, again, 9.8s on everything. He's very realistic, and some might even say conservative with his estimates, but I think for the most part, he's usually right, and I'm usually mostly wrong, sometimes right. But so I really trust his estimates, and he worked on this book and thought it had a chance at getting a 9.8. Let's see what Legion of Monsters #1 got when I had originally assessed this as a 9.4. 9.8, awesome. All right, excellent. This was a book that I bid on Again, I'm kind of a sucker for everything Elsa Bloodstone. And if you've heard me talk about her as kind of being the queen of speculators, I still believe that. And this book was highlighted because the character of Elsa Bloodstone had moved away from her original incarnation where she had blonde hair and she was kind of like a mix between a Monster Hunter and Indiana Jones a little bit, but had a certain, I would say, character design to her. And this was kind of a reimagining where her hair color even switched from blonde to orange and really truly became more of this character related to Marvel horror. And as she appeared in the Werewolf by Night feature, it seemed like the character of Elsa was going to be attached to that certain genre. So, really great start to this submission. Got the bump, as far as I'm concerned, from a 9.4 all the way up to a 9.8. Looks great. So far, so good there. And the next book that we have to look at is Dazzler number 3. Now, I'd mentioned this when I picked this book up from Mile High Comics, that there's so much hype and attention on Dazzler and whether or not she'll be portrayed by that musician or singer. I forget her name, but she is still rumored to play Dazzler or appear in Deadpool 3 in some regard, and all books related to Dazzler are, I don't want to say hot, but they're definitely interesting, more so than they've ever been. And while there are probably a short list of Dazzler keys, I feel like all Dazzler covers or things being associated with her, and with the Deadpool 3 trailer, a lot of people, I think, guessed that the character that they showed quickly with the mask was Doctor Doom, which he wasn't, but it could be a disciple of Doom or maybe even an alternate reality version. I don't believe that to be the case, but there is some idea out there floating around that Doctor Doom could be introduced in some way in Deadpool 3. Now, in the history of Dazzler, what's interesting is that her character and her powers were maybe a bit underwhelming, and so they ended up writing a story where she faces off against Doctor Doom to kind of prove out like how maybe relevant or powerful Dazzler is. And so it's kind of a combination essentially of Doctor Doom and Dazzler. Dazzler now being, I would say, more of a desirable character to collect than before. Doctor Doom has always been awesome and fantastic. Now, this one, to me, was a 9.2 out of the gate from Mile High Comics. And looking at what I paid for it versus the potential to get a grade bump, I felt like this was worth getting pressed. So I sent it to Palm Beach, and then looking at his notes, he is saying that it probably is somewhere between a 9.6 and a 9.8. So this will be a test to see in terms of what he predicts. Again, the realistic estimate here is a 9.6. Going from a 9.2 to a 9.6, very nice. I would say also, honestly, that not a ton of value in this book at a 9.6 or below. And so I'm really looking to get a 9.8 on this one, you know, as I am on all of these books. But in terms of value, with this really this is not a key. It's just a book that I felt like it would be interesting to have in a 9.8 because of all of the things I mentioned. Now it's time to go ahead and reveal the grade to see. Originally, Dazzler number 3 from 1981, I gave a 9.2, sent it off for pressing, and it got a 9.6. So looking at the estimates that I get back from Palm Beach, what he's basically saying is 9.8 is not out of the realm of possibility, but it's more likely to get a 9.6, and there it is. Looks gorgeous, looks very, very nice, clean, and I'm trying to figure out maybe what was preventing it. Maybe just some slight color rub around the corners, but probably what got it was this corner here on the bottom. Again, my working theory, and one of the working theories I have, is that any sort of blunting or softening, or just like this one, I would say it's not that it's wrapped or anything, but it's almost like the paper is coming up and it's just being slightly lifted off of the corner. And if you look at the corner specifically that I'm talking about, I really feel like there's been a huge shift at CGC where they're focused on sharpness of corners and how the paper is actually wrapped near the corner to the back of the book. And this one, clearly, it has softening. It's almost just slightly blunted and then a hairline color break down at the corner. For that corner to be as, again, I don't want to say damaged, but it is not as pristine as you would like. To get a 9.6 is interesting. The rest of the book looks completely free of any defects. Very, very nicely done in terms of the final outcome of the press. It's just a corner like that, you can't really press that out. And it's just something that I've even been understanding prior to submitting these books for pressing, where I would have looked at it and just maybe thought twice. And the point of the theory is you could potentially have some defects elsewhere in the book, but if the corner is not super sharp, it's probably not going to get a 9.8. And that's exactly what I would say for this book. If I were to just disregard this corner, everything else looks like it's a 9.8 candidate. So it's just, again, something I'm thinking about, I'm trying to work through, and I'm trying to really be mindful of when I send in not just books for CGC grading, but I'm going to spend the extra money to also get them pressed. I want to make sure that I'm looking at defects that can actually be pressed out. And those corners, I'm really just starting to pay more closer attention to those. All right, let's move on to the next book. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 13 from 2023. And this was a book I picked up from Midtown Comics. And it's, I don't even know if you could say modern key, but first appearance of Gold Goblin. And as I was just reviewing the values, this was a book that had some value in a 9.8 as people were speculating on the Gold Goblin character. And I'd had several copies of this, and I felt like this was a strong 9.8 candidate. But it was a 9.4 originally, and part of this was a little bit of an experiment to send in almost a brand new book that had a particular type of defect to see if Palm Beach could work his magic on the book. And I originally graded it as a 9.4. Looking at his notes, he said that a 9.8 would be possible. So that's his way of saying that it should get a 9.8, but because it's CGC, we don't know. It could be a 9.6. But according to his estimate, this one could end up being a 9.8. And let's see if it did, in fact, get it all the way up to 9.8. And it did. Thank you, Palm Beach Comic Presser. Again, when I say experiment, it's not that I'm trying to test his skills per se, but almost testing my own, meaning I want to see if I can identify a book that has what I feel is a pressable defect. Can it go through the entire process and actually get the bump? And this completely passed the test. This went from what I thought was a 9.4 all the way up to a 9.8. And what I wanted to do was send a book like this in because it's not a huge investment. Now, the investment is really on the pressing and the CGC side, but it's not a huge investment in terms of what I paid for the book, and then also ultimately what the final value is. And so if I was wrong, it was a very affordable experiment. And like I said, it passed the test. There's no indicator in terms of any character first appearances on this, as probably the Gold Goblin maybe is just not significant enough for CGC to make note of it, but it is interesting sometimes when they choose not to put any note on the label. The only note that they added is this is Amazing Spider-Man. They put the legacy number 907 on this book. So great job, Palm Beach Comic Presser, taking this from what was my opinion, a 9.4, all the way up to a 9.8. So great job on that one. Okay, next one to take a look at is X Infernus number 1. This is from 2009. Love this cover of magic in the persona of Darkchild with cover art by David Finch. I'm a big David Finch fan, and if you've been watching a lot of my unboxings, this was a book that I was targeting from Mile High Comics, where I was able to get the book for either at cover price or just a little bit less. And on average, the condition of the books that you're getting back from Mile High, I would say this probably is right around that average. Overall, when you're talking about books from no specific era, paper quality being different, just averaging all of the books over time that I've purchased from Mile High, it averages somewhere around a 9.2. And so to get this book back and having me assess it as a 9.4, it's not surprising, and still feel like for the amount of money that I paid for this book, it was worth taking a shot at getting this pressed in hope to improve it above my assessed grade of 9.4. Now, looking at Palm Beach's notes, he has this as 9.8 probable. So I almost feel like we're looking at an injury list. We're looking at players that are probable for the game or ruled out. And again, what I love about it is he's trying to stay humble. Like this really, if CGC is on their game and the right person is showing up and is in a good mood and is grading the books the way that they should, this should be a 9.8, but he's always leaving a little bit of an out just in case there's something that CGC identifies along the way and decides to give it a 9.6. But the good news is it looks like it's going to get a grade bump either way up from the 9.4. And here we are, X Infernus #1 from 2009, purchased from Mile High Comics, submitted for pressing, and it got a 9.8. Fantastic. Okay, so now if you're watching the videos and looking at what I paid for these books and looking at all of my spreadsheet data, the reason that I was buying this is because it has sneaky value in a 9.8. And so to get a book, not to really reinvent the rules of economics wheel, but in terms of like a buy low, sell high, this was really identifying a book that was available for sale regularly where I felt like it was extremely underpriced because of the potential, not necessarily for the value if it were a 9.2, 9.4, but the value of the potential. And finally, I can maybe close this experimental loop completely where I was kind of including this in every Mile High order that I've been placing in late 2023. And to finally get a 9.8 copy is fantastic. So thank you, Palm Beach, for the jump on this book up from a 9.4 to a 9.8. And out of the books that I was picking up from Mile High, I really felt like this one had the most potential for an improvement. Was typically getting these back from Mile High with stacking crease, and the book looks great. Nice, pressed out in a 9.8. Great job, awesome. X Infernus from 2009. Okay, we are halfway there. I submitted 8 books, and there we have 4. 3 9.8s out of the first 4. And the next one is Amazing Spider-Man 239 from 1983. This one, I would say, is probably the book that I had graded the lowest, but I thought in terms of potential, this book was interesting. This is a newsstand edition, and this was an auction win from Infinity Comics, and I was targeting this book specifically because based on the scans, to me, it looked like it had a 9.8 potential. I wasn't exactly sure. And although I don't really target newsstands, the newsstand for this particular book with Hobgoblin on the cover, with this being his second appearance, first appearing in the issue before in ASM 238, which is one of the bigger Amazing Spider-Man keys from this era, I thought like a second appearance newsstand copy looks to be in at least high grade, if not all the way up to a 9.8. It was worth a shot in terms of bidding on this book and trying to acquire it. So I targeted the book, I prepped for it, I bid on it. My grade when I got it back, though, was a 9.0. I felt like it had too many pressable defects and potentially some wear on it, more so than I thought in the scan. But I felt like the defects that I had identified on the book were defects that I know that Palm Beach Comic Presser could assess and handle. And even though I gave the book a 9.0, I was hopeful that this could get the jump all the way to a 9.8. And so I had put it in the queue to send to him, and off it went. Now, looking at his notes, he's acknowledging my 9.0 grade, but he did say that there is slight blunting of spine corners, slight tanning of the outside edge of the back cover. Now, the tanning part is not something I picked up on, so I appreciate him identifying it. And his estimate was a 9.6 probable. Again, talking about probabilities and how he estimates. What he's saying is this could be a 9.4. It's likely, though, that it could be a 9.6. But to me, he's saying this isn't a 9.8, that he's still identified some defects that just can't be pressed out. So let's take a look at Amazing Spider-Man 239 from 1983, the newsstand edition, to see the grade that it got. And it got a 9.6 white pages. I'm very happy with that, taking it all the way from a 9 to a 9.6. And I think that this book, I was going to say amazing, just great cover art by John Romita Jr. You have the Hobgoblin there on the cover, but also, if you can see in the background, is in kind of yellow and light blue. His face is actually there behind Spider-Man and Hobgoblin. So that's really cool as well. And when I was reading Amazing Spider-Man as a kid, Hobgoblin was a character that was like the mystery around his identity and all of that. Kind of a villain that it was always a theme of like him and Spider-Man. And so it's a character that is important to me in terms of his Spider-Man's rogues gallery. And this is essentially his second appearance. Again, it's not noted on the label just because I don't think they're going to put second, third, 50th appearance. It's just not all that interesting to CGC unless it's a super mega character. But this actually, according to the CGC label, the first Spider-Man versus Hobgoblin battle. Also a Madam Web appearance, with her movie breaking box office records and being a huge hit. The fact that she makes an appearance in here, I guess, is significant. She had appeared 29 issues earlier in ASM 210. But really cool newsstand copy of Amazing Spider-Man 239 in a 9.6. So while I'm only 3 for 5 at 9.8s, Palm Beach is 5 for 5 in terms of taking my assessed grade and improving the books. So let's just keep that going while we look at the next book. And this is Daredevil 232 from 1986. This was also an Infinity Comics auction win. I am completely in love with the Daredevil Born Again storyline written by Frank Miller, illustrated by David Mazzucchelli. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I love reading it over and over, and I'm always picking up some nuance in the art or the storytelling that's just, I don't know, there's something about the character and what Matt Murdock goes through and how the character is just beaten down based on what's happening to him and what's happening around him and how what's happening with his friends. I just love it. And so anything related to that storyline and Daredevil, I want to collect, and I want to try and collect and get slabbed and get as many books in high grade as possible, just because the storyline is important to me, where we're not really dealing with a lot of cosmic beings and just not a lot of these otherworldly type of characters and powers. This is street level, and just the character and the story of Daredevil has been so good for so long, and it's really responsible, I feel, to Frank Miller for really transforming the character as we know him today and as we think about him. Also kind of interesting, we have the first appearance of Nuke in this issue, and he is related to the whole weapons program. So if that becomes kind of an issue down the road between Wolverine, Deadpool, and some of the other weapon related characters, Nuke is quite an interesting character in this specific issue of Daredevil 232. Now, looking at my original assessment when I got this back from Infinity Comics, I had looked at it as a 9.4, and that's what I assessed it as. And then looking at Palm Beach Comic Presser's notes, he has this one as 9.8 likely. That's it. No other notes. So this is him kind of, I don't want to say taking a stand, but he's putting himself out there saying this should get a 9.8. And let's see if he's right. Daredevil 232 from 1986, and it gets a 9.8. Fantastic. Great work, Palm Beach Comic Presser. Absolutely love it. And as I was saying with the CGC labels, it's kind of up to them. They actually do write on here that this is the first appearance of Nuke. Frank Miller on story, David Mazzucchelli on cover and art. And I love everything about this cover in terms of just the symmetry with Daredevil, even the character box art of him putting the gloves on, the yellow, just the primary colors here, everything about it, love it. 9.8, super happy to have this one. 9.8 white pages of Daredevil 232. Great job. Absolutely love that. Well done. Thank you so much. All right, that's exciting. Really happy that one came back in a 9.8. The next one we have Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars number 12. Speaking of Doctor Doom, also speaking of maybe a series that I want to collect in a 9.8 if possible. This one I also bid on from Infinity Comics, and like Amazing Spider-Man 239, when I got it back and I had assessed the book myself, I feel like it was just not as high grade copy as I thought. I gave it a 9.2. And similar story, just felt like the defects were pressable and wanted to give Palm Beach a shot at fixing this book up. Now, the trouble with this one, I'm looking at Palm Beach's notes. So again, just trying to be realistic as he is. And he's saying that there were bindery tears on the top and bottom of the book. And again, if we're talking about bindery tears, we're talking about being near the corner. I've mentioned about how I feel now and how I feel about CGC feeling about corners. And I think Palm Beach is also kind of in alignment with CGC on this one, as he's saying that it's a 9.6/9.4. And that's his way of saying this could be a 9.4. So it would still be an improvement. But there is maybe an outside chance at a 9.6, but not a 9.8. So a little bit disappointing on my part. Again, just trying to think about how I look at these books going forward. I guess we should look at the grade first. I'll do this where I'm being proactive about my disappointment. But let's go ahead and take a look at the grade. This is Secret Wars number 12 from 1985. And it got a 9.8. This happened last time. I kept talking about my disappointment, and I think it was because I was trusting Palm Beach's estimates and just assuming that he was going to be right. And as I've said before, he was wrong, but in the right way. So this is great. Another Secret Wars in the 12-issue series that I have in a 9.8. So I'm starting to close the gap here. I would love to have all 12 issues, 9.8 white pages. This book is particularly tough with the all magenta background. Some of these colors, the dyes, they end up picking up more of the defects. And I see what he's saying about the bindery tearing. This one up here in the corner itself, there is a little bit of tearing, and they let it go. And I feel like the bindery tearing is something that I don't really understand or know well enough. Even the bottom corner. I mean, Palm Beach's assessment is absolutely correct. But I feel like what they ended up doing is saying the book is in such great shape structurally, no spine ticks whatsoever, but even the outer corners are sharp and great, that they're going to let the bindery tearing just kind of go. I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. If I were working at CGC as a professional grader, I would really have to understand, because this isn't manufacturing necessarily. It's almost just the stress of the book splitting on the corner because it's so tightly bound. I mean, this bottom corner even has a slight tear to it because of the bindery tearing, but the tearing is actually going in a perpendicular direction straight into the spine. So very strange, but this was another kind of experimental book where I don't quite understand how CGC assesses bindery tears. And I wanted to see, because a lot of times I graded this a 9.2. So that pretty much tells you how I feel about books in this condition with the tearing. But what I wanted to see is if the other defects, particularly like a stacking crease, just other non-color breaking defects, pressable defects, if Palm Beach could work on that and make the book as pristine as possible, then what would CGC say strictly about bindery tears? And I think this is probably Exhibit A for how they feel about it. Now, I want to see consistently over time, would they let bindery tears pass? But at least in this example, they're giving it a 9.8. So once again, great job, Palm Beach. I'm sorry you were wrong on this one. But again, sorry in the right direction in terms of the grade of the book. Okay, we've got one more to go here, and this is New X-Men 116, another back-to-back magenta covers here. Very interesting cover art by Frank Quitely. This was a book that I picked up off of Atomic Avenue. I've slowed down my buying on Atomic Avenue, but I have made some recent purchases, specifically buying from what I would say are kind of the premium sellers. And I only call them that just because those are the sellers that consistently deliver books in high grade over time. I've averaged them out, and I don't have a lot of issues with them in terms of contacting them saying that your near-mid book was actually a fine minus and trying to deal with that nonsense. It's just consistently high-grade comics above a particular threshold where I like to buy from. And this seller I bought from in the past, and this book I had assessed at a 9.6. So I think the last one here, this is going to be interesting because this was the book that I gave the highest grade to, and I just felt like there was something about it that was preventing it from going through a 9.8 pre-screen that I wanted Palm Beach to take a look at and work on. Now, looking at his notes, he's saying that this is a 9.8 likely. So again, just trusting his assessment at being, I would say, either 100% correct or maybe being the grade that it would get at a minimum. My hopes are high for this book. So let's take a look here. This is New X-Men number 116, written by Grant Morrison, art by Frank Quitely. This is from 2001, and it, sure enough, got the 9.8. Great job. Thank you so much, Palm Beach Comic Presser. And then to have it like maybe sit next to Secret Wars here, you can see the magenta color dye. Very interesting. I mean, two books that really don't have any business sitting next to each other, now graded in a 9.8. So if you're a magenta cover art collector, maybe these are two books that you're looking for. But I hadn't thought about that. I know people collect yellow covers, but maybe I'll start a new trend here, collecting magenta colors. Now, I will say, in summary, I am thrilled with this submission. Great job by Palm Beach Comic Book Presser. Can't thank you enough. Can't mention you enough. Here are the details if you'd like to get in touch with him to see if you'd like to get your books pressed by him. But he was 8 for 8 in terms of grade improvements. That is a fantastic return rate, where the lowest grade, I got 2 9.6s and 6 9.8s. And this was a mixture of grades ranging from 9.0 to 9.4, except for New X-Men 116 that I thought was a 9.6, so it just needed some minor improvement to get that bump. But thrilled. This was a fantastic submission, great results, very, very happy, very pleased, and I'm looking forward to continuing this process of looking at my books, assessing them, and determining which books are going to remain as is in my personal collection versus which books do I think could not only be improved, but books that are worth this additional investment in terms of time, resources, money to go through this process and get these books graded. I'm super happy with the results. Thank you, Palm Beach Comic Presser. Thank you for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time. This one I bid on from Infinity Comics, and